Welcome to Science Advice Experiences from Next Generation Researcher Groups. This panel will highlight the strengths of different advisory structures and provide recommendations to institutions on how to include next generation researcher voices in their decision-making processes. Let me introduce the moderator for today's session, Vanessa Song, Policy Advisor in the Office of the Chief Science Advisor of Canada. The panelists are Arthi Ramachandran, member of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO Youth Advisory Group, Josée Maurais, Vice President of Quebec's Chief Scientist's Intersectoral Student Committee, Madison Rilling, member of the Chief Science Advisor of Canada's Youth Council, Binyam Sisay Mendisu, Program Officer at UNESCO International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa and member of the Global Young Academy, and finally, Sivani Baskaran, past president of the Toronto Science Policy Network. I am now giving the floor to Vanessa Song.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome to this panel on science advice experiences from next generation researchers. As mentioned, my name is Vanessa Song, and I'm speaking to you today from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We're all the panelists coming to you from a different place today, and we're very grateful to the original stewards of these lands and waters for sharing not only their home, but also their knowledge with us. To get started, we will begin with a tour de table with all our panelists. I would ask that each panelist say a little bit about themselves and the organization that they're here representing. We actually have a very interesting mix of different organizations in terms of how they're structured and in terms of how they give science advice. So I would also invite the speakers to say a few words about the strengths and the challenges experienced by those groups because of their structure or where they're positioned in terms of science advice. So we'll start with you, Madison.
Thank you, Vanessa. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thank you for including me in this panel. My name is Madison Rilling. I am a recent PhD graduate in physics, and I'm currently in charge of talent and outreach within Quebec's Cluster for Excellence in Optics and Photonics. And today I'm a part of this panel as a current member of Canada's Chief Science Advisors Youth Council. And I was also former vice president of Quebec's Chief Scientist's Intersectoral Student Committee. And I am also a board member of Science and Policy Exchange, which are two groups that other members of the panel will speak to today. So the Canada's Chief Science Advisors Youth Council is an inaugural youth advisory committee that is made up of members of about 20 members, aged 17 to 30 years old. And our mandate is to inform and advise Canada's Chief Science Advisor on key issues and challenges that are facing the science community. And we also work with members of the Office of the Chief Science Advisor in that regard, like Vanessa, who's here with us today. I'd say that strengths of our committee is that we have the opportunity to provide input directly to the Chief Science Advisor so we can react to high priority issues, so we can think of the response to the pandemic. And we can also provide the youth's perspective on long-term, or we say more like macro level issues. So for example, building back better after the pandemic, how do we envision the science landscape afterwards? So it's really, I'd say that's a key strength, and it's exactly where we can give that input and how we can give it. And I would say that another strength is the valuable network that the office can provide us. So in terms of training and involvement in different issues within the office and the work that the Chief Science Advisor does. But what is a strength can also be a challenge. So the fact that we can react to high priority issues means that we need to provide that input in a very responsive manner. So that can be difficult, is finding the right ways to react very quickly on key issues and high priority issues. I'd say another challenge is the fact that being a pan-Canadian youth council, it's having that sufficient level of representation. And I think that's something that's probably unachievable, but we're always trying to represent as much as the youth science community as possible. So that is one challenge that we have to work with in the different work and projects that we do. So that's where I'd stop it here to kick off the panel.
Thank you very much, Madison. We'll come to you next, Josée. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for the organizing committee for the opportunity to be part of this panel also. So it's a pleasure to be here, and yes, as mentioned earlier, I am here as a representative of the Intersectoral Student Committee of the Chief Scientists of Québec, which is a statutory committee of the Fonds de Recherche du Québec, so of the three funds, so Nature and Technology, Health, and Society and Culture. I'm also a board member of the FRQ-NT and a PhD student in physical chemistry at the University of Sherbrooke. So the mandate of the Intersectoral Student Committee is to advise the chief scientist and also the boards of directors for the three funds. And also we try to identify strategies to promote the accessibility of research funding to optimize the potential of next generation researchers. And also to enhance its influence and impact in the research and in the society. I would say that the strength of the CIA lies in its established structure within the FRQ. So we have access to a lot of resources, so that is really helpful for the different projects that we're working on. And also one of the strengths is the intersectoral composition of the committee, and we have a lot of diverse students that compose the CIA. I would say also that there are a lot of opportunities and channels to connect with the NGR and consult on a large scale due to the resources that we have access to. And of course, the collaboration that we have, the direct collaboration with the FRQ enables us to have a big impact with the recommendations that we make. And we have the opportunity to respond quickly to urgent and important issues regarding to the NGR to mitigate the impacts on them. So the COVID-19 impacts was a good example of how we could react quickly and have make recommendations in that direction. I would say that for the challenges, it's a great learning experience, but since it's a student committee, of course, the turnover of members is significant. So, of course, it's a little bit more difficult to preserve expertise and skills that are developed throughout the years or months. So sometimes it's really short. The mandates are really short, and also because of that, it's hard to preserve continuity in the different projects that we're working on. So I would say that organizational memory can be different to keep up, and also the collaborations that we have with other groups in Quebec and in Canada also can sometimes be hard to maintain since the members are changing quite quickly.
Thank you, Josée. Arthi, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Arthi Ramachandran. Thank you for the invitation to this panel. I'm really excited to be here with all of these wonderful panelists. So I am a youth advisory group member for the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, specifically part of the Natural Sciences section. I'm a former Science and Policy Exchange treasurer and volunteer, which is a trainee-led nonprofit group based in Montreal that brings the voices of next generation researchers into the policy landscape. I'm also finishing up my PhD in Arctic microbial ecology, and I'm a policy analyst for the federal Canadian government, specifically working at Natural Resources Canada. However, today I'm here speaking in my role as a youth advisory group member of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. So our members represent most regions in Canada and actively participate in CC UNESCO initiatives to help identify the issues and concerns of youth, to develop projects, and to make recommendations based on our viewpoints and experiences. And so this is a really great group to work with and a great organization. And so one of the strengths of this organization is that it's very large. There's many opportunities for the youths to engage, and there are many resources for us to use as well. The Youth Advisory Group has many diverse members as well, and we have different sections such as natural sciences, social sciences, communications, education. So we try to spread out our experience and our expertise throughout these groups to make it the most we can and try to deliver high impact recommendations. Of course, with a large organization, there's also comes the challenges of being a large organization. So it's sometimes hard to see the impact of our work, and where it's going is not always clear. And like Josée was saying, we kind of lack the institutional memory as well, coming from a student organization where turnover is much higher than in some other organizations. So some of the projects don't have the same continuity throughout the years that we would like. So those are some of the challenges that we face right now with the Canadian Commission for UNESCO group.
Thank you very much. We're coming to you, Binyam, next, please.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Very honored to be part of this panel as well. My name is Binyam Sisay, and I'm from Ethiopia. I'm a member of the Global Young Academy, and last year I served as a co-lead of the Science Advice Working Group of the Global Young Academy. And in 2019, I was selected as INGSA Research Associate, and currently I work for UNESCO. The Global Young Academy is a member-driven and a member-led international society of young scientists, and some of the opportunities we have about, with organizations like the Global Young Academy is that Global Young Academy aspires to be the voice of young scientists globally, with members and alumni from about 90 countries worldwide. And it also encourages international, intergenerational, and transdisciplinary collaboration and dialogue among scientists and beyond, such as policymakers and government. Some of the challenges that I wanted to highlight is in connection to young scientists and next generation researchers is a lack of comprehensive, deliberate, formal and continuous engagement and capacity development initiatives that cater for such a group in the science and policy space. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll come to you, Sivani.
Hi, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to participate on this panel. So my name is Sivani. I'm a co-founder and a past president of the Toronto Science Policy Network. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto in environmental chemistry. So a little bit about TSPN, or the Toronto Science Policy Network. We're a student group at the University of Toronto. So we're completely student run, and we provide a platform for students, postdocs, to learn and engage in science and policy. And so we typically run a few different events throughout the year, panels, workshops, and talks, just as an avenue for people who are unfamiliar with this space to kind of engage and learn what it's about. We also have in the past done a few advocacy initiatives, which is an opportunity for us to engage with kind of the decision-making process. And so a couple of our bigger advocacy initiatives include a Vote Science campaign that we were part of in 2019, leading due to the federal election. And then also more recently, the Canadian graduate student survey for graduate students across Canada, and which was to learn about their impacts that COVID-19 closures and changes caused on their research, on their finances, and on their personal lives. And so we're a very different group from a very formal advisory group as a student-run, student-led organization within a university institution. And some of our strengths come from that because we have a very diverse set of students and perspectives, and we have the opportunity to use resources from our institutions and connect within the UFT community and take advantage of that, the space that we have on campus. We're also a really good gateway for students who engage with science policy. Many students who participate in our events are unfamiliar with the space. So it's a really good opportunity for people to learn about science policy, learn what opportunities are available to them. And a lot of our events have very little direction from senior advisors. So in that sense, we have a very good opportunity to kind of choose where we want to go and what topics to focus on. Sometimes, like with the COVID survey, we choose something very topical and very focused on student priorities. And then sometimes we choose something that is still relevant to the current policy realm, but a little bit more nuanced, like focusing on homelessness and healthcare or transit within Toronto. Some of our challenges also similar to what other students, other members of the panel have already said, is the transition of knowledge between students and between members of the Toronto Science Policy Network as people graduate or move on to other roles. We want to make sure that there is kind of more consistent passing of that knowledge. And as a student group, we don't always have the most direct access to decision makers, which is kind of a challenge for us. But it's something that we can overcome, and I think we're going to be talking about some of these issues a little later on as well. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sivani. And to round out kind of the introduction section of this panel, I will also jump in and quickly mention that, as mentioned, I am currently a policy advisor in the Office of the Chief Science Advisor, but I'm also here representing Science and Policy Exchange as a former president and former board member. So Science and Policy Exchange, or SPE, I think Arthi has already mentioned, is a student-led nonprofit organization with a mission to foster the student voice and evidence-informed decision-making at different levels. Similar to what Sivani has already pointed out with student groups, the challenges are typically around kind of access to high-level decision makers. That's not necessarily always the case because in our experience, sometimes decision makers are more responsive to student groups in some cases, but not always. So that I would definitely agree that that is one of the key challenges. And but one of the strengths I would say is because we're a nonprofit and we're actually not associated with an institution like CSPN, we're actually extremely nimble and we don't really have all of the issues and topics are extremely member driven and we don't, we're our own boss, I guess, and we can mobilize very quickly. So that's what I would put forth for SPE. And that wraps up the first round. I think that was an extremely interesting context setting for all of the different groups that we're here representing. And let's move into topic one. So, in our discussions just now, a lot of challenges were identified associated with each group and the extent to which they can provide advice. And we want to be solution-oriented, so I'd like to invite the panelists now to put forth some potential actions for consideration that could address some of those, some of the challenges that were identified. And I'd like to start with you, Madison.
Thank you, Vanessa. I have to say, it was really great listening to all the introductions, and it's really easy to nod in agreement to all the challenges that are faced by the different committees, because though we might all be different in structure, the challenges tend to remain the same, but luckily there are different ways that we can either work together or learn from one another. So it's really interesting to have all these different structures together at the same table. In my experience, I would say I would address the solutions in terms of key ingredients that need to be included in having these types of committees or councils, and I'd present them as support, structure, and sustainability. So a lot of us mentioned the idea of training. So providing support it's really important for the next generation researchers or the youth to be able to provide relevant perspectives, or in a way that's relevant to the body that they're advising. So it can be training on the political reality, or for example, in our case, the environment within which the Office of the Chief Science Advisor operates. So it's also about learning about the formal and the informal methods or tools for science advice, so that when we do provide either our perspective through reports or other, it's in a way that can be integrated into the work that they do. One thing that was very useful for us in our case was providing the committee with mentors. So people who have experience in the government environment, who have experience, for example, in science communication, people who can support us in the different work that we do and help us optimize how we do that work and that advising. So another point I would say is structure. So one challenge I brought forth was being reactionary. So how can you create a structure that allows for very rapid input? So it's important to establish contact points, channels of communication, to really open the door for rapid input and contributions of the different youth council members. So this really optimizes opportunities to give the perspective, but also to be involved in different work that's relevant, or that it can be relevant to have the youth perspective or the next generation researcher perspective. And I'd finish by talking about sustainability. So sustainability, I think one way of looking at it is, for example, in our case, it's integrating the youth council with the office and not just with the chief science advisor. So yes, there is the input is directed to that role, but having the committee or the council operate with the office integrates it in all of the activities. So it's not just dependent, let's say, on one role. And I think Josée would be able to speak to that as well within Quebec's Chief Scientists Committee. And it also, for one challenge I had talked about, is pan-Canadian representation. So how do you become truly representative? And that's sustainability is a way to address this, in the sense that you want to create broader, or channels for broader consultation within the youth community. So either through focus groups, surveys, being able to reach out to, for example, the pool of candidates who had applied to become members, but who are also willing to be part of the different work that we do. So it's really about creating bridges with other next generation researcher groups across Canada, which is a way to make the work that we do more sustainable and create effective channels of communication with the youth groups.
Thank you, Madison. Arthi, I wanted to come to you next, kind of for your perspective as someone who works with an advisory group that kind of has more of like an international advice giving capacity.
For sure. Thanks, Vanessa. A lot of what Madison said echoes my thoughts as well. And I think one of the really important things to address the challenges of impact and how youth groups can provide impact is to make sure that they have an equal seat at the table. And so one thing that's really great about the Canadian Commission for UNESCO is that one of the Youth Advisory Group members does have a seat at the Executive Committee board, and make sure that the voices of the youth are heard, that our recommendations are taken to the table as well. And so that's one way of making sure that our perspectives are there from the get-go. And talking about representation, Madison mentioned, pan-Canadian representation, how that can be difficult. And one of the things CC UNESCO has now been trying to implement for our youth advisory group is to take into account lived experiences and not just academic success. Because, of course, these different perspectives are really important in bringing together recommendations, as well as making sure that we kind of have a broader sense of issues and can address problems in different ways. So I think it's really important to have that representation. Of course, increased training is always great, especially because we have members who are from 18 to 30 years old. And so you have like a wide range of knowledge in terms of work, life, school. And so it's really great to have training and mentorships. And so putting that into place would be really helpful. And one of the things that I had spoken about was kind of the loss of institutional knowledge over time because of high turnover. And so it's just something that to have kind of make sure that our projects are, kind of all the materials are in one place so that we can have that continuity throughout the years and that we're not losing important projects just because we don't know what happened in the past and we're not redoing work. And the great thing about CC UNESCO is the ability to work with other youth advisory groups that are also part of UNESCO and having the ability to collaborate with them and to be able to share experiences, understand the context of their lives, living somewhere else, having different issues, different ways of tackling problems. And so those types of collaboration and international discourse is really important as well.
That's great. Thank you, Arthi. Sivani, I wonder if you have any thoughts to add from the perspective of a more student-led organization.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I want to kind of address kind of the two main issues that we kind of talked about, transition being one of them, which Arthi kind of already also spoke about. But documentation, as she mentioned, is something that we try to do at TSVN as a way of kind of maintaining and assisting new members and new leadership in the future. And I think, again, it goes back to training as well. And so providing those opportunities for new folks to get engaged with the group and within science policy and creating opportunities is really key, regardless of what type of advisory council it is, to kind of help with that transition and maintaining the institutional knowledge. The other kind of point that I wanted to address just quickly is the access to decision makers for student groups. We're not directly working with anyone in particular. And so oftentimes it's a matter of making our own connections and building our own network. So we want to make sure like we're working and we know about kind of the other science policy groups that are working within Canada and within the kind of the spaces that we're interested in. So groups like Science Policy and Science Policy Exchange, the CSA, YC, CIE, as well as some new emerging science policy networks and groups within Canada. And it's really important that we build those connections with our peers, but also within sort of the administrative and the decision makers in government and elected officials. So we do a few things. We connect directly with our peers, but we also send sometimes cold emails. When we did our survey on COVID-19 impacts, we were sending a lot of cold emails to deans and elected officials, letting them know this is what we did and we just want to chat and just reaching out. And that's sort of a good way that we found to connect with people. The other opportunity, which I think the other student groups we've collaborated on in the past with is op-eds. So these are op-eds usually to publications like University Affairs, Research Money in the past, and sort of other Canadian publications, and sometimes more national or international publications like the Journal of Science, Policy and Governance. And these are opportunities for us to share our thoughts on different policy options and sometimes even publishing policy memos about current issues and our opinions on them as a way to kind of publish our own advice without maybe directly coming into contact with the decision makers.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I want to turn the conversation a little bit right now towards something that has come up already in our conversation, which is training and opportunities. And maybe I will just set the stage a little bit for this conversation. Now, I think we would all agree that there are an increasing number of opportunities for young researchers to kind of participate in science policy and science advice. And I think the inclusion of this panel at the INGSA conference is a great testament to this. I wouldn't be a great representative for SPE if I didn't mention that, you know, SPE has really been at the forefront of students recognizing that there, you know, students needed more opportunity to get exposed to science policy and actively creating those opportunities for learning and for practice. But as I mentioned, the students themselves are creating those opportunities, and that's not always possible for everyone. It really comes from a position of privilege. Myself, I was a fully funded graduate student whose supervisor was okay with me spending time outside the lab to do this kind of extra career development for myself. And I didn't have any, for example, caretaking responsibilities that would prevent me from doing these things. So, you know, I personally, you know, I think that we need to do more to make these opportunities more accessible. But I want to come to you, Binyam, because you're one of the panelists who mentioned training and capacity building in our introductory session, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on this.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. I agree with you that there are more and more opportunities these days in connection, you know, and recognizing the contribution of next generation researchers and giving them the opportunities. But I wouldn't say that existing training and engagement opportunities are adequate enough. I think earlier, Madison, Arthi, and Sivani all have mentioned the importance of training. And I wanted to raise 2 points why I feel these opportunities are not good enough. My first point has to do with the ways in which the existing training programs are conceptualized. In my opinion, there is strong demand to frame and conceptualize science advice trainings as part of the overall development of next generation researchers as science leaders. Next generation science leaders are expected to take active engagement in the science and policy space and beyond. Such an approach is expected to lead to a long-term and sustainable results. What I see, for example, in one of the programs that Global Young Academy and the University of Pretoria in South Africa run, it's called the African Science Leadership Program. They use the collective leadership model. And the collective leadership capacity requires not only excellence in the sciences that we do, but also collaborative, communication, and critical thinking skills. Therefore, next generation researchers who have developed these science leadership capacities and who practice these skills regularly to collaborate and communicate with colleagues from diverse fields and countries will obviously find the engagement with policymakers easier and more effective. So I really see that if it's designed and conceptualized in such a way that we build leaders, next generation leaders, that makes more, it contributes to more long-term results. And the second point I would like to raise very briefly is the point that you have also touched upon earlier, is the demand to avail more institutionalized, deliberate, and formal capacity development opportunities for young scientists. This may take different approaches, including, for example, integrating these trainings as part of the formal curriculum of graduate program studies, or there is a lot we can learn from the best practices in Canada. I think the Intersectoral Student Committee and the next generation researchers that are provided with formal opportunities to contribute to science and policy debates is something that we can learn from. So I'm glad that representatives from these different groups are here with us to share their experiences and challenges. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Josée, I'd like to come to you next.
Yeah, so I agree with what Vanessa and Binyam were saying, that there's definitely more opportunities nowadays. And I think the opportunities are also offered by more diverse organizations than before. I think something that could be improved is to maybe offer, relay, and present those opportunities to a broader audience to ensure greater diversity of individuals. Sometimes it's always, all I've heard this before, it's like always the same students that are involved in some science policy or groups, or and they go from science policy groups to the others. So we need to be really sensible, I think, to this, because when I'm talking about diversity, I'm talking about backgrounds, opinions, academic pathways, and past experiences. And also, it can become easy or tempting to fall into the trap of recruiting NGR who think alike. So I think when I'm speaking about giving these opportunities to a greater diversity of individuals, I mean to people from different backgrounds. Yeah. So, and I think it's very important, because if we want to represent and be sensitive to issues that concern NGR, then we need to be sure that we represent them on either on the political, social, and academic level that are really diverse from students to students. So I think that's something that we just need to be sure to give the opportunities to a more diverse group. And I would say that for the offered training, it's harder to find, but I mean, it's available if we look for it well, but it's often complementary and outside training programs, as you mentioned, Vanessa. And therefore, I would say that involvement opportunities and training can be more difficult to fit in a busy schedule, and not always accessible for NGR that, for example, are not funded as people who have to work besides their training program, or people with extracurricular obligations such as family due to lack of time. And also something that we have observed with past consultations that we made is that sometimes training for science policy is not always as easy to promote or valorize on a CV. So sometimes it can be harder to prioritize or to make it as important in our schedule than our PhD or anything else that we're working on right now. So.
Thank you, Josée, for those insightful comments. So with the time that we have left, I would like to ask the panel, I think, the big question, which is, why have NGRs involved in science advice? What is the value that NGRs bring to kind of science policy, science advice, kind of writ large? Since the theme for today's program is resilience and foresight, maybe speak to that perspective as well. Let's start with Arthi, please.
Thanks, Vanessa. So I think it's really important to have NGRs involved because we have a unique perspective, which can be attributed to the increased diversity that we see in NGRs from academic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, social backgrounds. And I think this leads to the inclusion of a lot of different ways of knowing. Also, the fact that a lot of NGRs have different lived experiences contributes to their perspectives, to the recommendations they provide, and to the advice that they think is important to give. And of course, the challenges that we face today are decidedly very different from what they were even 5 or 10 years ago, with the climate crisis kind of being at this forefront. We're living through a pandemic. And in all of this, I think bringing the different voices and perspectives of the NGRs is really crucial to kind of have a different path forward and hopefully a more sustainable path forward.
Thank you. Terrific points. Binyam, do you have anything to add?
Yes, Vanessa, I agree with Arthi in the sense that next generation researchers are really uniquely positioned to bring fresh and new insights to policy debates. And I wanted to highlight that, today, as we are living in an age of a quick, very dynamic and difficult to predict societal transitions, one crucial way of ensuring the quality and sufficiency of scientific evidence to policymaking is determined by the diversity of the sources, the source of the evidence. And obviously, next generation researchers who have much stake in policies of today and tomorrow have so much to contribute to improve the quality of the evidence, thereby the quality of science advice. That's one thing. And the second point is, I think Arthi also mentioned it earlier, it's also important to emphasize the importance of representation. For example, speaking about my continent, Africa, more than 70% of the population is considered youth. And I think by representing next generational research voices, not only do they bring new insights, but also they represent the generation. So I feel that they are uniquely positioned to play that double role. And I believe this also leads to more inclusive, quote unquote, inclusive science advice. And finally, just want to end by saying inclusive science advice has much to contribute to develop much needed trust in public policy making and ensuring resilience and sustainability.
Thank you. Just a few minutes left here. Josée, do you have any points to add?
Yes, of course, I agree with the diversity of the insights and perspective that NGR can bring, and also the representativity, as NGR are important stakeholders. But I think it's also important that NGR are involved for the learning experience that can be acquired through these experiences, and also because knowledge transfer between the generations is important. So the cooperation that is developed through solution finding is really important, is essential, I think. And also the future will hold many more challenges and requires NGR who have been exposed, involved, and equipped in finding solutions with different people in the face of adversity. So I think those are the points that I would maybe just add here.
Thank you. Madison?
Yeah, I'd say that there's a positive advantage of being naive in the sense that these youth committees or next generation researchers tend to question the structures that are in place and the ways that things are done and reimagine how things can be done better and differently. So if you complement this with the training aspect, there can be really relevant ideas and recommendations that come out of it. I'd say also strengths are in there is strength in numbers. So we see it right here today. There's already a network of next generation researchers learning from each other, learning from our best practices, and working together in a way that we can amplify and build on the different work that we do. And I'm going to echo what Binyam said earlier. the fact that we are training scientific leaders of tomorrow. So these are people here who have gained confidence in their ideas and actions and being involved in these groups, and they will be skilled in working with different professionals across different disciplines and weighing science, along with a lot of different societal factors. So there is a lot of value that can be recognized.
Sivani, you have the last word here.
I'm just going to say, I think everyone's covered all the points that I wanted to mention. So there's so much value with bringing NGRs to the table. And so I hope that these suggestions are like taken into account when you consider the NGR voices. So I'll leave it there and pass it back to you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Well, I mean, same with me. I absolutely agree with what all the panelists have said, and I don't have any additional points to add. So I'll take this opportunity to wrap up this discussion and thank the panelists for spending this time with us and sharing their very knowledgeable insight on the experience of their experiences as next generation researchers participating in science advice. And thank you to the conference for including us. And I hope that this can be an ongoing discussion and we can build upon kind of the experiences that have been spoken of here today and try to improve and increase the experiences and opportunities that NGRs have to participate in the decision-making process. So thank you all very much. And to the audience, I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thanks to our moderator, Vanessa Song, and thanks to the panelists for this interesting panel, but also thanks to all of you in advance for voting for your favorite digital posters. It is very simple, 2 clicks, one on the digital posters tab on your left and one on the heart button of the videos you enjoy. The videos with the most likes and engagement will be in the running to win awards. We will give these awards during the last plenary on September 1st.